Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. My name is Christian D. Evans, your host. And guys, we have someone very special that we're bringing to you. And this guy is just an expert in public speaking. To hear his story from where he was to where he's at to where he's going, and being able to make an impact on all the people. We all understand that public speaking, that is like the number one fear of a lot of people. And one of the things is been able for him to come in and be able to obviously assist and be able to help other business owners to dial in their public speaking ability, because if you don't, then you are not able to make an impact to as many people as you can. So this man, Brenden, is the founder of MasterTalk, a YouTube channel he started to help the world master the art of public speaking and communication. He helps purpose-driven entrepreneurs, just like my listeners, to achieve their milestone in life and master their message. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brenden. Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate you joining us, man.
Hey, likewise. Thanks for having me, Christian.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about obviously your story. I know you weren't born this way, right? So tell me kind of the struggle, the ups and downs, and obviously where you're at, where you're going, man.
Absolutely, man. So for me, the story started when I was 5 years old. So I grew up in a city called Montreal up in Canada. For those who don't know, Montreal is a city where most people speak English, but also French. So my parents looked at me when I was 5 and they said, "Hey, I know you're doing well in school and you're getting started with it all, but we have to send you to French school so you can learn the language." So of course, great decision by them. I ended up learning the language, but the process wasn't so fun, Christian, because my whole life, not only was I uncomfortable with presentations, I had to present in a language I didn't even know. So I struggled quite a bit growing up.
That's unbelievable, man. And so tell me, like, obviously being able to take that struggle, that frustration, and obviously what was that turning point that said, okay, you need to really dial this skill in, but also how that skill has been able to make an impact in what you've been able to do.
Yeah, of course. So after struggling for many years with my communication, because I kept giving presentations in French all the time, I didn't really know the language. When I went to university and I switched to an English curriculum, I was able to communicate much better. But the other piece of that is I started doing these things called case competitions. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. Well, other guys my age were playing basketball or rugby or baseball or something else that I'm clearly not well equipped to do. So what I did instead is I did presentations competitively. And that's how I learned how to present. I probably presented hundreds of times in university, but the goal was never to turn this into a business or a YouTube channel or anything like that. The goal is to be a Fortune 500 executive. But what ended up happening right before I ended my university life is a lot of the people I was coaching in university kept asking me a question that I didn't have the answer to. And the question was, how did you learn how to speak? Brenden, how did you learn it? You didn't have a coach. You didn't do Toastmasters. How did you do it? And I kind of just said, like I just practice, and I got it. But they would always reply with, but did you like listen to YouTube videos? And that's when I stopped and I thought, who watches YouTube videos on public speaking? So a few days before I started working at IBM, this is many years ago, like 2.5 years ago, I just started watching all of the YouTube videos on the topic. And I was horrified by what I was hearing. All the advice was so general, like, Christian, you should like be yourself and get up on a stage. So I got so fed up with it that I started making videos in my basement, which ended up turning into what it is today.
That is remarkable, man. And to see that trajectory, and tell me a little bit, obviously, the impact that you've been able to help, and tell me a little bit of some of the stories that some of the top executives that you've been able to help, because, maybe clarifying that message or being able to just dial in their tonality or their monotone, whatever it is. Just tell me a little bit about, how you've been able to make an impact because of the struggle that you went through, and to working with other entrepreneurs now.
Absolutely. And the advice I always share on this, Christian, because, even if a lot of your audience is very successful already, there's always an angle about our lives that we have some insecurity around. So even if we're really good in our businesses, there might be another area like our health, like something else where you go, oh, I'm not really comfortable in this area. How do I get better? And myself included, by the way. So the advice I always share on this is always start with the people you're comfortable serving. So for me, when I started MasterTalk, I probably started coaching C-suite. I was around 22, 23. But of course, you can imagine that sounds cool, but it really wasn't at the beginning because I was coaching individuals who had worked in the organizations longer than I was alive. So there's a lot of insecurity there. So what pushed me to do it? Well, what pushed me, Christian, was realizing the following. Wait a second. I was making the YouTube videos for the 15-year-old girl or boy who couldn't afford me. So I started coaching them. And then I moved up to people my own age. And then I moved up to people who were my age. And then after it was seniors and managers and directors and vice presidents, and now it's entrepreneurs and CEOs. But I think the message here is, yes, definitely been fortunate to have worked with some credible people. But I think the message for people is just focus on the people that you're starting with, and then eventually as you gain competence, this is where the confidence comes from. But the real problem with most people is they don't make the decision to start in any skill that they're uncomfortable with, and that's how we build experiences over time.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So what have you noticed with, like, entrepreneurs that have that desire, but for some odd reason, obviously we understand the only way to grow is that uncomfort, right? And you have to be uncomfortable, and then that's where you grow. But a lot of people don't like that. So what have you noticed for those that have succeeded in your system and those that have not, and what are their characteristics to be able to say, okay, this they were willing to branch out, or what does that look like for those that actually succeeded in taking their life and their story and their business to the next level because they've been able to dial in the skill?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So let's dive into this. So what I would say, Christian, is all these entrepreneurs, all these successful people have goals, right? We all have maybe career goals, financial goals, health goals, right? It makes sense. But how many of us have communication goals? I would say 99% of the people I've met, worked or not worked with, no communication goals. Or if they do have goals, it's generally very vague. Like, hey, I want to start a podcast or speak on a stage. I go, well, if we don't have the target in mind, then what will happen is we don't prioritize that. And when we don't prioritize something, especially when we have a successful business, it falls to the wayside. Why would I work on my communication skills if I'm about to jump on a sales call and sell a $10,000 product? Well, I don't have time for this communication thing. Who cares about that? That's where the problem lies, Christian. So the first thing that we need to figure out is having a clear set of communication goals. But the challenge behind that is the reason most people struggle with building that is because, wait a second, what does being a great communicator even mean? Does it mean that you're saying less filler words? Does it mean, to your point, that our vocal variety is a bit better? And that's the challenge, is every great speaker has a different style. Tony Robbins is very different than Brene Brown, who's very different than Seth Godin. So how do we do this? The way to do this, and feel free to write this down and implement it, because I hate just giving information, be sure you're actually taking action on this, is pick 3 speakers that you personally admire. These could be thought leaders, coaches, people in your own industry where you say, wow, this person is an exceptional communicator. Write that person down on a piece of paper. And then what you want to do is point out one strength that you feel they have as a speaker and one weakness. And the reason we write one weakness is to humanize that individual, to say, well, this person has a gap in their game, so we can become more like them. And then the last piece of that is studying the individual speaker one at a time. So let's say Tony Robbins is one of the people on your goal sheet. I call this a communication goal sheet. You don't want to just watch his keynotes. You want to watch his keynotes with a different set of contact lenses. Because most of the time when you watch somebody like Tony, as an example, you're looking at what is the content that he's sharing. What can I actually learn from Tony? You're taking notes in that content. But what I would challenge you to do differently for 30 minutes a week, nothing too crazy, is look at them and say, how are they speaking? And just pay attention to the way that they're communicating. And that's how I got really good at communication really fast, where I would mimic them literally in my basement as they were speaking eventually. And then I copied their technique and then built my own version of it.
Wow, that's incredible. And I love what you said, because that's so actionable steps, very small, minuscule, but also just so very actionable. And so let me ask you as well, for those that, like you said just earlier, that those that don't think, oh, you know what, I don't really need to focus on public speaking. I need to focus on sales. I need to focus on this. But, and because there's so many things that as an entrepreneur, it pulls your attention, right? But explain a little bit further as well why they should be focusing on the ability to public speak and to have a fluent ability to speak and influence and so forth. Explain that a little bit further for our audience, for those that may not see the value in it yet.
Absolutely. So the way that I think about this, especially from the lens of an entrepreneur, is let's say a prospect comes out. Let's say you have a high ticket coaching business, super simple example, and they're considering you and 2 other prospects. Pretty simple example. Let's assume all 3 of you can do the job. All 3 of you have the same skill set. So how do we make the decision? Yeah, price is one of those factors. But for someone who's a very highly qualified prospect, price is not really the issue. It's really how good can I get the result and how much do I trust the person on the other side of the line? And here's the one thing I really want entrepreneurs to stick, and this is true if you're an executive too, is if you communicate 20% better, not 200%, not fun, just 20% better, just a bit better than everyone else, you stand out 100% of the time. And let me repeat that again. If you communicate just 20% better than every other prospect, every other competitor you're up against, you stand out 100% of the time. And this is why communication is so important, not just in the context of the people you sell services to, but to every stakeholder, to investors that you're trying to raise capital from, to customers that we talked about just now, to employees, because as you're scaling, especially into the 8, multiple 7, 8, now you're hiring a lot of people and you're inspiring them so that you can replace yourself out of the business. So in that situation too, you're not just telling them, hey, Christian, you should be doing this, or John, you should be doing. No, you're inspiring them to actually take action on the vision that you have. And if somebody else in the same industry as you is just communicating 20% better, they're going to convince that high tier executive, that high tier employee 100% of the time to join that person's company instead of yours. So it's also about attracting the best and the brightest. So yes, communication is the catalyst for everything that you do. So it's important to oil that engine so that you can set yourself up for success at later stages of the business that you're building.
Well, that is really remarkable, because just like you said, it is extremely imperative, because if you do not have that communication skill and ability to be very clear on what you want to communicate, there are the expectations and misunderstanding, and you may lose revenue, you may lose team members because of that misunderstanding, unless you're able to have a good inspiration and impact and influence in these people. Now, let me ask you as well, because of course what I'm always intrigued with just like you were saying just earlier is mimicking, right? Analyzing other people and their speaking behavior. How do you identify, okay, where I am Christian D. Evans, Tony Robbins is Tony Robbins, and I can mimic some of the things that he has, but also how do I become independent and have my own speaking patterns or habits and make it very organic for myself? What would you say to those people?
Great job. Great question. Sorry. I completely agree with that. And I call this public speaking identity. So otherwise known as PSI. So public speaking identity, which is as you're studying different speakers, Christian, what you'll eventually realize is some speakers resonate more with you than others. And this is normal because all of us is different. So I'll give you a quick example. It's super simple. My goal sheet will be completely different from yours, because the 3 speakers, even if I've studied many more than 3, I would say the 3 that I model my style after the most are Seth Godin, Gary Vaynerchuk, and Lewis Howes. Those are the top 3 that I model. So let me explain that really quickly so people have a tangible example. So Seth Godin is because the guy's an exceptional communicator, but he's a very thoughtful person. So he doesn't just go, okay, Chris, yeah, I have a goal sheet and that's it. He goes as many inches as necessary. It's like, let me keep pushing that thought leadership and add a lot more granularity to how I'm sharing an idea. And every time I listen to his podcast, I was like, wow, this guy goes like 20 inches deep, especially in his area of expertise, which is marketing and branding, of course. The other piece is Gary Vaynerchuk. What I loved about Gary Vaynerchuk's communication style, he's a very aggressive, to the point kind of guy, which is very similar to me. I'm a bit more tame because I can switch tones since I'm the speaking expert, I guess. But the other piece of that is his ability to share something so complicated in such a succinct way that it resonates not just for the 7-figure entrepreneur who's 40 years old or 30 years old, but also to the 6-year-old who's watching his TikTok. And that's very mind-blowing, is the level of relatability that he has in his communication style. So it's a constant reminder for me that when I'm sharing an idea on a podcast, I always want to make sure, boom, it hits the bullseye every single time. And if it doesn't hit the bullseye, I need to be accountable to that and say, what did I miss here? Why is Christian asking me too many questions about one specific topic? It must mean that Brenden missed the ball on something. Versus if Christian says, hey, that was money, let's go to the next topic. That means I'm doing the right thing. I got the right answer. And the third person that I modeled my speaking career after is Lewis Howes. Because he has a very soft tone when he communicates. So whenever he's speaking to the younger generation, people have a lot more insecurity. People are getting started with their journey and they're afraid to start that business. He speaks in a way where you go, wow, if Lewis could do it, I could definitely do it too. And Lewis was very important for me at the beginning of my journey, where I didn't feel I had the skills or the knacks or the ability to be the person I am today. So there's something I took away from all those three speakers. But I think the bottom line is just the fact that you're thinking about this gives you an advantage that 99% of your industry doesn't have, which is a clear direction for your communication goals. So even if it's not perfect as you're getting started with this sheet, just the fact that you're thinking about it puts you way ahead of everyone else, because most people don't even have communication goals to start with. And the best way to get rid of fear and insecurity is direction. When you know where you're going, you're not focusing on the fear you have of communication or the anxiety around it.
And see, that's what I find so interesting, because there's some of the most charismatic leaders that have an incredible public speaking voice. I know Ronald Reagan did. I know you have Martin Luther King Jr., but also you have individuals like Obama, right? That would be more slow and methodical, and and go, and all that stuff. But yet he got the point across. What I always find intriguing is let me ask you this, Brenden, what is the most impactful way to speak, or is it dependent upon obviously what you're trying to get across?
Absolutely. So I was like keeping this super simple. So what's kind of level one of this? How do we get started with this and speak more impactfully? So let's start with the framework that I call puzzle. So puzzle, like jigsaw puzzles, those things we used to play as kids. So let's say I asked you, Christian, it's a super easy question, don't worry. So let's say you're working on a jigsaw puzzle yourself. Which pieces would you start with first and why?
I would start with the corners, as well as the outside, the flat pieces, because those are easiest to find.
Right. I completely agree with you. Right. They're easiest to find. You're kind of like, phew, got it right. Just kidding. Right. They're easier to find. And then we work our way towards the middle. Right. But here's the thing. We don't do that in public speaking. Because when we're preparing a presentation, we do the opposite. We start with the middle first. We shove a bunch of stuff in our presentations. Whether you're a business owner who's pitching your product or service, or you're a business owner who's getting ready for a keynote at a conference, or you're an entrepreneur who's figuring out your sales script in one-on-one sales calls, it's always the same thing. Let's put a bunch of stuff there. And then the presentation sounds something like this. You roll through the entire thing. And then the closing, yeah, so thanks. And that's probably the biggest mistake. So to answer your question, Christian, how do we speak more impactfully? What's the easiest thing that we can do is implement puzzle. Start with the edges first. Practice your introduction 50 times, not 2 times, not 3 times. Do it 50 times. 50 seems like a big number, but it really isn't, because your introduction is like a minute or 2. Same thing with the conclusion. What's a great movie with the terrible ending? Last time I checked, terrible movie, right? So 50 times the close. And what you'll realize after just like an hour and a half of practice, wait a second, I've just given my introduction, my conclusion 50 times. This sounds way better. This is the best introduction, the best close that I've ever did in my life. Now let me tackle the middle. But here's the last punchline. Who does 1,000-piece puzzles on their own? Last time I checked, nobody, right? So do it with the team. You don't necessarily need a coach if you're not at that stage of your business yet. If you're doing multiple 6, I highly recommend a coach. But if you're just getting started, you don't have a business, find like accountability partners, people around you who say, hey, let me give you some feedback. But the goal here is not really getting the best feedback or anything, especially if you don't hire a coach, but rather saying, let's make this a bit more communal. Let's bring more community. Because most of the time when you're practicing a presentation, you're just alone in your basement. You're just typing away at the keyboard. It's lonely. It's boring. But if you're a business owner, you're sharing something exciting. So do it with other business owners. Do a little mastermind with Christian's friends and then build it together. But the key is have fun as you're tackling the middle.
That's incredible. I love that. I love that what you just said there, because I see so many different avenues and different structures. And let me ask you as well, a little bit more detailed. So when you're educating and teaching these individuals. I know I've seen so many people in speaking, and I've always been intrigued by how people speak. Obviously different hand movements, and obviously politicians they have to get someone to structure and this and that, and it's almost too perfect, right? But there's also in today's world, people want authenticity. It's okay to make a mistake because then all of a sudden it shows that you're human. But also, I do know that silence and to emphasize a point, it's very, very important in your tonality. And there's still all those little tidbits. So to build upon what you just said, as that's the structure, what is that next level where it really dives in? Almost you're hitting the subconscious of people, and people are just so flowing in. You're like, wow, I can't. So many people definitely I see on conferences. You get distracted. But how do you engage an audience so well through storytelling or through emphasizing or tonality or whatever? What does that look like? Explain that to really take your next level, and what you just said, the foundation, to take it to the next level and really making, wow, he was a great speaker.
Man, I love the granularity they're asking me. So let's kind of summarize what we have so far so people can follow as well the logic. So why are the communication goals important? That's similar to having an overall business strategy. If you're just doing your day to day and you're not focusing on where the future is going, you're kind of like a deer in headlights, because you're not even sure if you want to wake up and go, oh, what I'm doing is not even relevant anymore for where I want to be in 5 years. Because I might want a lifestyle business that's doing $1 million a year, but I'm not really living my lifestyle because I'm doing 40 hours of sales calls. So what communication goals allows you to do is it gives you some idea, and some is better than none, right? Some is always better than none, on where the future is. Okay, this is where I want to be. Kind of like what Gary Vee says, right? Micro speed, right? Macro patience. So what you're doing on a day-to-day, you're moving really quickly, but you're very patient about what the long-term outcomes are in your business. Same thing with communication. So you have those communication goals. So going to micro speed, what are you doing tactically? Puzzle's the first level. What's the next level? The next level is what I call the perfect presentation. So what I highly recommend business owners start thinking about is apply puzzle on one presentation. Here's what I mean. Another way of explaining this. The last place to master your communication skills is the boardroom. Whether it's an actual boardroom or a virtual one, the main idea is if you're just focused on the boardroom, you're not going to master communication. Here's why. All your presentations are always changing. All of your presentations are probably boring. And all of your presentations are not repeatable. You actually can't present the same thing over and over again. And the people that are listening to you are not super engaged with what you're saying. So it's really difficult for you to practice and see that exponential curve of improvement, versus what you want to do instead is look at puzzle and say, okay, what is the one presentation in my business that I need to present 100 times? Let me repeat that one again, because it's important for you to take a note. What is the one presentation in my business that I need to present 100 times? And how do I perfect that one? Communication is like a multiplier effect, Christian, where when you practice one presentation and you absolutely master it, what happens is there's a trickling down effect where the technique you learned in that one skill applies to everything. Here's an example, and then I'll give you the tactics for that. Tony Robbins, he's been doing the same damn event since he was in his early 20s. Unleash the power within. There's 3 days. Day 1 is this. Day 2, you're walking on fire. 3, you're jumping jacks. You're doing something. But it's always the same format. It's always the same content. He doesn't walk up to you at UPW and says, Christian, you want to talk about porcupines this weekend? No, it's like, no, Tony, I don't want to talk about porcupines. We're investing time and resources to be here so you can say the same shit you said for 40 years, because that's what we want to learn. Same concept, but on a smaller scale. And usually, just to give people some tips, let's say I was coaching you directly, what I would say for you, Christian, is your 5-minute presentation, your 10-minute presentation is your own podcast. If you were to explain your podcast to somebody to get them inspired to watch it or listen to it, what would you say in those 5 minutes? And how can we perfect that so it actually gets you an ROI? Same thing if you're a business owner. When you're on a stage and you're communicating your product, you want to do it in a way that's inspiring and not salesy. So the same way that Russell Brunson talks about ClickFunnels, he doesn't say ClickFunnels is a software where you can help. No, he says our mission is to empower entrepreneurs to spend less time on the logistics, less time on the admin, and more time helping other people live their life and impact their lives. That's the ethos of what ClickFunnels is. And Russell has been perfecting that message for, I don't think he started in 2004, so it's been like 15, 16 years. So same thing with you. What is that repeatable presentation? And then we could go to level 3 after.
Wow, wow. I love what you just said. And I'm so glad you were able to take that into the next level a little bit, because building that foundation is very important. And I think a lot of people see the value of it. But like you said, it has to do with a lot of marketing, but also clear communication, right? What I've known is I've seen, I think it was a speech, this day will live in infamy, right? It was not that, it was not actually made that. Same thing with, so many speeches, right? Even Winston Churchill and victory, 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 right? And so what I always find interesting is not about the length of that speech, but the content in that, and of course having those small little tips and tricks and things like that. Tell me a little bit more about, like, obviously when you're working with clients, getting into the tonality, right? Being able to slow down the voice, being able to really emphasize. I know Russell Brunson talks about stories, and unconsciously that's how you're really able to really bring people in, because our minds work in the story format, and being able to craft that story where, hey, you know what, this is the best way of doing it, right? Whatever it may be. And then as well as just having that eye contact. In fact, I was at a church the other day, actually a few weeks back, and what I loved about, I've never heard this before, he started naming people in the audience. Hey, James, it was so great, isn't that right, James? Isn't that right, Alfred? Right? And I thought, wow, that was really cool how he did that. Because what happened is it connected. It wasn't just he pointed, right? He pointed and he talked a specific name. And I don't know if that guy's name was James or not, but what happened was I was like, oh, he knows him, right? And so what happened was almost communication. It built a stronger relationship with the speaker. But anyways, I just want to hear a little bit more of kind of those little tidbits that could be revolutionary. And when you're emphasizing a point or influencing, and entrepreneurs, they want to impact millions, maybe billions someday, and you have to do that through the ability to communicate.
Absolutely, brother. So here's a good analogy for people to think about and wrap their heads around it. Public speaking, whether it's in the context of a podcast that we're doing right now, or a stage or a video, there's different mediums in how you can speak, but the logic is the same. You're juggling 18 balls at the same time. So one of those balls is vocal tone variety. Another one of those balls is, hey, keep your eyes on the lens whenever you're speaking to someone, especially virtually. Another one of those balls is speak more impactfully, et cetera, et cetera. So how you want to think about this is, if you try juggling all 18, you get discouraged really quickly. And that's why a lot of people go, oh, right, this communication thing, I don't want to spend any time on this. Let's focus on the next thing. And they don't build that expertise until they get to a level where it's like, red flag, we're doing multiple 7, and now it's like, I don't know how to communicate with my team, and but now I'm too busy, so now I'm also freaking out. So we want to avoid that before that happens. So going back to this, right now we juggle the first ball, which is communication goals, having that goal. Just saying, okay, what are the types of speakers that I want to emulate? Am I a bit more introverted like Brene Brown, Seth Godin, or am I more like crazy extroverted like a Tony, like a Gary Vee, and making those decisions internally? That's the first one. Second ball is, okay, regardless of what type of speaker I am or who I am, implementing puzzle is important. Because if I structure my presentations in the future like that, I could easily know how to practice public speaking versus just going through the whole thing over and over again and not seeing incremental levels of success. And then the third ball is the repeatable presentation. Now we're selecting one presentation, we're putting all of our focus there. And I'll give another quick example. If you're not a business owner, let's say you're a multiple 6-figure executive, or you're getting started in a leadership role. For you, you might say, well, Brent, I don't own the business. How am I supposed to find that repeatable presentation? So for somebody like Julia, who's a bank executive, for her, it's going to be something more like, she coaches kids on marketing once a quarter for a pro bono initiative she does. So for that 60-minute presentation where she's coaching the kids on marketing, my message to Julie is, hey, in the program, let's focus on that presentation you're presenting to the kids, because that's the repeatable part about your life, the presentation you're always delivering, or finding that. And then the level after that, the fourth ball, I guess, so to speak, I've never gotten this far in a podcast, which is awesome, is now we're going to go through the 5 levels of technique. So now you got the speech, you've written it down, you're making a lot of mistakes with your technique, you're saying, how do I refine this? So the good news is the content's already written, we're not changing the content, literally, right? The focus is really on the technique. So the first level, super simple, smiling and eye contact. So smiling, Are you actually smiling in your speech? You'd be amazed at how much of a difference this makes. Just because you have an expertise, if people don't like you, you already lose. So be sure you're smiling. And I add the word smile in the script, in the speech. So let's say I'm coaching somebody one-on-one and I'm going, if you make a mistake, I'll literally say start again, start again, start again. But it says smile in the script as they're reading it. At the beginning, they're just reading the script, right, to get the technique. And then level two, in level one, the other piece is eye contact. Are you looking at the lens as you're speaking? You do your best. Level two, I rank them in order of ease. Okay, in ease. Level two is pausing. So this is where I literally insert the word pause in the script where people have to say, okay, I need to pause now. And then here. And then I need to smile too. Because it's not just because I do level one, I forget it. And then you move up. I'll quickly tell you what those levels are. Once again, don't want to overwhelm your audience too much. And then level three, I'll just give you all the others. Level three is vocal tone variety, adding highs and lows in your speech that project the emotion. So here's a quick point on that. If you think about the word celebration, there's a question back to you, Christian. Would that be high vocal tones or low vocal tones?
High, I would imagine.
Right. Hey, Christian, I had a celebration yesterday. It was really exciting. Really loved it. Same thing with car accident. Would that be high vocal tones or low vocal tones? Think
Well, I
about
would
it.
imagine high.
Right? Let's play this out, right? I got into a car accident yesterday. It was really nice.
Low.
Really low. Versus, hey, Christian, I didn't get into a car accident, but I got into a car accident. It was challenging. So notice why is it that whenever we hear celebration, it was really nice, why do we find that weird? Because there's an incongruence, or there's a misalignment rather, between the emotion we expect to feel with that word versus the emotion that the speaker is showing. So there's also that to keep on. But I'll also add, if you're already kind of listening to this, I don't recommend start with vocal variety. That's like week 8 in the programs that I teach. Start with the communication goals. Start with honestly, just to make this super clear, and then I'll tell you the rest. Don't worry. Is if you just do communication goals, puzzles, like you structure your presentation, you practice like that, and you focus on just one presentation, just doing these 3 things puts you ahead of 90% of your industry. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. Because even Russell doesn't do that sometimes, like the guy from ClickFunnels. Like I was listening to him speak and I was like, he's great speaker. But I could find a lot of things. I was like, I would have done that differently too. So if you just do these 3 different techniques, you're already ahead of like 90% of the game. I'd even argue 95 because most people don't have communication goals. So what we're saying here is bonus, right? So we're just giving the bonus. I just want to add that clarification. So level 3 is the vocal tones. And then level 4 is the pacing. How quickly are you speaking in a point? Versus how much are you slowing down to emphasize the point. And then level 5 is put it all together and improvise.
That's awesome, man. And what I find so interesting, what you're just saying, I really appreciate, first of all, you getting into such detail, because I know a lot of my audience, they're natural salespeople, right? Where they have that ability to just talk and blah, 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 but sometimes they just talk really quick or really slow or whatever it may be. And to be able to fine tune, to really slow down or whatever it may be, I think that's going to be very beneficial because you're hitting those phases that are kind of, a little bit more expert and intermediate, which is awesome. Also, what I just want to share with my audience, one of the things I'm taking away the most is it's almost like a play. It's almost theatrics. It's almost becoming an actor. I know, listening to Matthew McConaughey and listening to Denzel Washington and how they take and interpret their character. They do exactly what Brendan's talking about, is taking it. And that's what it really comes down to. There's no coincidence that they are the best actors and actresses out there, because they take every single sentence and every single thing and they think about, okay, what would they do and emphasize? And do you think that the director does that? No, of course, it's the actual actor that takes those small little tidbits, and all they have is just the vernacular and the words, but it's the character, it's the actor that takes those and makes it really, and that's the reason why you feel emotion on a movie screen. That's the reason why you laugh. That's the reason, because of just how you're able to do it. And as well as what I always find interesting is comedians and how they know exactly the pinpoints, and it's not a coincidence on this. And let me ask you this as well, for those, because I think sometimes we have this misconception. It's like, oh, we've arrived. I finally got there, right? So you've obviously talked about, of course, there's phases, right? You're not going to be, Ronald Reagan overnight. You're not going to be these people like the best people out there right away, right? Tony Robbins. But obviously having those small strategic steps to align yourself to get there. but also I want to have the right perspective for those that, because I have some people I've talked to that already know that they're really good, right? They've been able to do speaking. For how do they take their speaking habits and dial it up even 1%, 2%? And what does that look like to be able to say, I've already spoken in front of 10,000 people or 5,000 people, 1,000 people, whatever. But how do I take myself 1%, 2% and dial that in a little bit?
Yeah. And a lot of those business owners say that. They go, oh, yeah, I'm already crushing. And they are, right? They're very
Yeah.
successful. They've had a lot of great success revenue wise. I think for me, the only response I would have to that is how big do you want to play? Right. I think the biggest lesson, I saw Tony in person a few weeks ago during Funnel Hacking Live, and I sat down in that audience, and everyone who was sitting there was asking themselves this question, Christian, which is, what can I learn from Tony? Right? They're taking notes, giving a lot of business mastery, conference details. He's talking about all the different, what's the difference between operate, all that stuff, artists, whatever. I'm sure you know all that stuff too. And everyone's taking notes on this. But I asked myself a very different question. The question I asked myself is, what does it take to be Tony Robbins? What sacrifices do I need to make in my life to get to that level of mastery? Because I'm not bad at communication. But I'm also not gonna tell you I'm number one in the world. Because I think anyone who's a great coach invests in other coaches. They always believe there's a next level to them. Like even for me, I think it's easy for me to say, oh yeah, I coach C-suite level executives. I guess I'm the best. I hate people like that. Because for me, it's more about saying, no, 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 I've done well. I've had some success relative to my age and what I've done with my medium, but there's always a next level, always. And that's the exciting part. So when I was looking at Tony, I was like, wow, this guy's companies are doing $8 billion a year, literally. Why is he spending 6 hours of his life speaking at a conference? There is no speaking fee that can make up for his time. His time is literally infinite now per hour. It's gotten to a level where it's like, you could pay me $25 million to be there. Is it really worth it for me? Not really. So why is he doing that? Because he calls himself in his terminology an artist. He's always refining what's possible. And he's still speaking with the same energy, the same enthusiasm, even at the age of 62. And I think the message that I wanted to share through that story is all of us have a next level. And I think what all of the best speakers in the world have in common, whether it's Simon Sinek, insert anyone, Esther Perel, Brene Brown, Tony Robbins, what they share in common is that they're always looking at people who are better than them or just as good as them and saying, what is the one story? What is the one analogy? What is the one thing in my technique that I can always change? And I'll give you another quick example with podcasting. Right, obviously now I sound like super direct. I get straight to the point. All my points are succinct. But what people also don't get is that I've done 500 podcasts. Right? So if I did this the first time, you asked me all these technical questions, I would have been like, what's the next level? I want to share information, Christian, but I'm not sure how to explain it without rambling. And then I go to the next one. The next one. Oh, I'm getting asked the same question 20 times now. Okay, now my 20th time, now I know how to answer it. And then over time, I built the mastery. But even now, there's still things I'm looking at myself, and you're asking me, and I'm like, I felt I could have done better on that question. I feel I need to rewatch this and get to the next level. So the point is, there's always a next level, and it's all about how you interpret it.
Definitely, definitely. Because see, that's what I find so interesting is, and this is how I look at working out and all sorts of things. You go to a point where all of a sudden you see massive growth, like massive weight loss or whatever. And all of a sudden it's like you've plateaued, but you have to stay consistent during that plateau because you may not see any growth, but it is growing. And then all of a sudden it just exponentially grows. And I'd love to hear a little bit more on what you've seen in some of your clients that you've worked with where they've maybe experienced that, but what did you tell them during that plateau part? Because we all have to experience it. We have to acknowledge it's going to be part of the journey, but then all of a sudden there's that exponential. It's like, oh my gosh, it just comes so second nature. What does that look like?
Dude, I've been on like 500 podcasts. No one has asked me that. That is like exceptional question. I completely agree. Let's nerd out over this. Where is the plateau? The plateau is always technique. So what happens is, let's say a business owner, even if they're doing multiple 6, multiple 7, there's always something in their technique that I can find. Like Russell, he speaks way too quickly. And I know a lot of people say, well, that's his style. Well, no, it's not, because he's losing a lot of people in the audience. So I would change some stuff. But the key is let's say they start customer journey at the beginning, and they master all the quirks. So I go through all the 5 levels of technique. I nerd out over every little detail until it's absolutely perfect. And then I teach them how to be casual speakers after. But I teach them what is the art of excellence that they need to be striving for. But then at some point, they plateau. And the reason they plateau is because everyone around them says they're incredible. Oh my God, Christian, every time you speak, I don't know what happened to you, but every time you're speaking, it's so succinct, it's clear, your technique. And in their head, they're like, yeah, because Brenden taught me how to optimize my pausing, my vocal tone. And they're like robots. They kind of got all the things sorted out. But then they go, what now? I guess I'm an exceptional communicator. And I go, how do I get to, let's say, a Brenden level or higher than me, a Tony level or something? What's the gap now? So then the advanced program, the level after that some people do, it's not a question of technique anymore. It's a question of the mind. So I tell them intentionally, right, that, hey, you're going to see a lot less progress in the advanced program. They go, what do you mean? I say, you'll see a lot of progress, but it won't be as tangible as the first level. Because in the first level, like everything we talked about, they did the puzzle, they did the repeatable presentation. So at this point, they're getting crazy results, right? They're super happy. Their technique is absolutely exceptional. But now they're like, well, like, how do I get to Tony? How do I get to the Brenden? How do I get to the next thing? And the next thing is a study of the mind, which is, who are you? What is your identity as a speaker? How do we triple down on communication goals? Because there's probably like 7 other levels to goals that we haven't even talked about. Once again, I don't want to, so I'm kind of like, should I share all that or do I want to confuse it? But I'll give you one example of that. Is, let's say the next level to what I shared earlier is you add a 3rd box and you ask yourself, what impact did they make that you want to model? Okay, sure, we can copy their technique all day, but what is the actual impact that they've made? And the reason that's so important is it plays into the identity. And the reason why Tony Robbins is still standing up there on a stage and speaking, even if he really doesn't have to, is there's only one reason. And it's not money. It's not financials. It's not his career. It's not opportunity. It's his identity. Because that is what Tony Robbins does. Tony Robbins is someone who starts a session at 8 p.m., ends it at 10 a.m. He's the type of person who speaks 16 hours straight without bathroom breaks. That's the type of human being that he decided to be, right? That's the key. So the only way to plateau after, like, to pass that, but honestly, if you just made it to that plateau, you've already beaten 98% of everybody. So already there, you have enough to scale to multiple 7. You're good. This is really, now we're really talking to people who want to be Tony. This is where I'm speaking to directly, is like, you want to get to that final level, is you need to figure out what is that next level. So I'll give you an example with me to make it concrete. So I got to a place in my career when I was like early 20s, and I had maxed out a lot of the levels of my technique. Okay, I nerded out over all techniques that we shared today in this episode. But at some point, and even my communication goals were sorted out. But at some point I was like, where's my next meal? Like, where's my next game? What's the next place? And I realized that the only game left to play is the game of contribution, which is, how do I create a platform that is so big that every human being in the world becomes an exceptional communicator? So when I got to that place, I was like, okay, I really need to step up my communication goals. I need to step up everything. I need to look at Tony and go, okay, he's 1,000 times better than me. I need to humble myself. I need to get better. Even if I'm already maxed out, I need to start nerding it even more. And then I broke through that final ceiling, and I'm still climbing, right? I'm still going for it. So I hope that made sense. I know we're getting a bit more abstract now as we're kind of leading towards that last percentile or two, but I hope that was relevant and useful.
No, that was awesome, because what I love what you're doing is you're so strategic in the way you think about these things, right? And it's that 1 to 2%. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs, they do that in their business, right? They hit, 7 figures, 8 figures, and how do you get to 9 figures? How do you get to the next level, right? And that's the same thing with anything, right? And I loved your approach in the way you even approach it to speaking, right? There you are going to hit that plateau, and you are going to be like, wow, I'm really good. And you could stay there and you could be very good, but also how do you become great, right? Where you're okay, you are known for it. And like you said, just having that identity. And one of the things is it's almost like also identity and brand, right? It's like, okay, when you're on the stage, when people think of you as your name, what do they think of, right? If you think of Dave Ramsey, you have certain, things that you think about. Robert Kiyosaki, whoever it may be. Now, they have different little speaking patterns, but at the end of the day, it's identity, it's a brand, and it's a consistency. And so I really just appreciate you really just joining our podcast, Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast, because you've been able to really dive into some really intricate things and really being able to, speak on that behalf. Obviously, Brenden, you know what you're talking about at a very, very high level. And
Thank
I
you,
just
brother.
really appreciate your value and with our audience. And so real quick, Brenden, how can they reach out to you? How can they obviously follow you on YouTube? Let's talk a little bit about that, bud.
Yeah, absolutely. So MasterTalk is the best way to get involved with me, which is simply MasterTalk in one word. And then if you're interested in coaching service or different things like that, the best way, just reach out to me directly on LinkedIn and we can have a conversation.
Awesome. Awesome. And Brenden, obviously, before I let you go, and again, I really appreciate your time being on here. Is there anything else, the last little words of wisdom, if you will, that you want to share with with our audience?
Absolutely. So I'll share a book recommendation, some life advice. So the book recommendation, and I always recommend it because it's so underrated, and for people working on their communication skills, nobody talks about it. So that's why I always like talking about it. And it's a book called Thirst by Scott Harrison. So Scott Harrison is the CEO of a nonprofit called Charity Water. Big mission. It's helped millions of people across the world gain access to clean water. In the context of what we do as business owners, though, Scott is an absolute master at storytelling communication. And what's specifically interesting is he's done it in the nonprofit space. And the reason I emphasize that is because he's been able to build a fantastic brand and mission. He's raised hundreds of millions of dollars for his charity with a very small budget. So when you're listening to what he's done in his story from end to end, you'll learn a lot of insights that you can apply back into your business. And all my facilitations, all my programs are based a lot on how he's done it with Charity Water. Highly recommend the read. Life advice, for those of you who have made it to the end of this podcast, so 50 minutes in, I would say the last piece of advice that really matters is the following. Be insane or be the same. If you want to be like everyone else, that's totally fine. But if you want to do something important with your life, you want to do something revolutionary, you want to impact a lot of people, the only way forward is the path of insanity. Don't you find it odd that a 22-year-old all those years ago started a YouTube channel, not on pranks, not on music, but on public speaking and executive communication tips? And then that guy went on to coach those executives, but he still lives in his mother's basement despite his success. He doesn't own a car. He loves Justin Bieber. He dances alone in his basement an hour a day. So why does that matter, Christian? The reason that matters is simple. Because when you realize that every single decision that you make should matter to the only person that matters, which is you, that is the day that you'll probably make the right ones and live a life filled with meaning and happiness. So I encourage all of you to be a bit more insane rather than just being like everyone else.
That is awesome, Brenden. And thank you again, man. That is, I love that advice. I love that, what you just said. And guys, obviously in the description below, that's how you can reach out to Brenden, reaching out to his YouTube, watching his content, and reaching out to his LinkedIn as well. Brenden, again, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it.
Likewise. So what a fantastic conversation. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.